This episode goes out to our patron, Dia Chappelle. Going Dia Chappelle and we're gonna get married. Hi there, Garrett Robinson here. Welcome to the 11th episode of the Nightblade Epic Podcast Season 4. Hey listener, I just wanted to drop a reminder that Life Mage Dawning, the latest book of Underrealm, is now out and available for you to read. I keep hearing from people as they're finishing the book, and I can't even tell you how much that means to me. Seriously, as a fun fact and a side note, if you ever read a book you really love, and that includes listening to the audiobook, you have no idea how much it means to an author when you reach out and tell us. And hey, as another side note, one way of telling me what you think about my books is by reviewing them online. So if you've already read Life Mage Dawning, it would be incredibly helpful if you could go leave a review on Amazon or Goodreads. That'd be amazing. But if you haven't read Life Mage Dawning yet, I'm going to tell you something a little bit weird. Don't read it until after you've finished this season of the podcast. Yeah, I mean it. Because something is going to happen in this season that, well, it's hard to talk about this. I don't want to spoil anything. But there's something coming up in this season of the podcast that is going to make Life Mage Dawning so much better to read. Of course, I'm not the boss of you, so if you want to ignore my advice, or if you've already read Shadeborn and you know what's coming, you can go pick up your copy of Life Mage Dawning right now at underrealm.net/rc. Or you can read the book by becoming a supporter on Patreon for $5 a month or more at patreon.com/GarrettB.Robinson. Okay, now it's time for today's episode. Today, you're getting chapters 15 and 16 of Shadeborn, the fourth book in the Nightblade epic. When we left off, Lauren and her friends had decided to visit a village in the Birchwood and leave a false trail for the Shades pursuing them. Enjoy! Shadeborn, Chapter 15. It took them several hours more to finally reach the place, a group of homes built in a part of the wood that had been cleared for the settlement. As they came closer, approaching from the east as they had planned, Lauren saw signs of the inhabitants all around. A small shed built out in the trees, a woodsman's saw and axe lying near a tree, and even some food that had been abandoned. But when at last they came within sight of the village, they saw that all their caution had been in vain. At first, Lauren saw nothing amiss, for the place was quiet. There was no one in sight, and the only movement was the same thin white wisps of smoke they had seen from afar, rising lazily from the chimneys. They saw the first body only moments later. It was a woman, or had been. A wound gaped in her back, her guts spread out on the forest floor around her. She lay face down and had clearly been crawling. Annis screamed before Jem's hand shot up to cover her mouth. Lauren's stomach twisted and her teeth clenched. She turned her eyes quickly away. Beside her, Chet had gone the same shade of elf white as he had been when they fled northward. "Zane, stay here with the children," said Lauren. "Chet, come with me." "It could be dangerous," he said, still pale as a sheet. "Someone could be alive. Mayhap they need help. Stay if you want, but I will not." So saying, she leaped from Midnight's saddle and pulled her bow from her back. After a moment, she heard the heavy thud of Chet's boots landing in the grass, and then his soft footsteps as he came after her. That was a relief, but still the hairs on the back of her neck rose ever higher the farther she advanced. The village had become a charnel house, with bodies strewn about everywhere. As in Northwood, no one had been spared. Their blood had pooled together, and the bodies lay prone in it, like weary travelers cooling their brows in a river of red. Some had been maimed, their limbs lying close by, while others had been skewered or flayed open. but of the attackers there was no sign, nor were any of the homes cast down or burnt. "Why did they leave the village standing?" whispered Chet. He walked a half-pace behind her and to the side, his staff held in his hands before him like a spear. "Why should they not?" said Lauren. "The Shades have no interest in this place. Likely they were searching for us." "But we left them vanquished in the woods days ago." "Only 4. You and I saw more than that when they came by our campfire, and I would guess that there are many, many more in the woods. Likely they have divided themselves into several parties, roving through the birchwood in search of us." A sharp cry made them both jump, but they saw no threat, nor indeed any source for the voice. It sounded again. Lauren saw where it came from, and she felt the need to retch. One of the corpses was not a corpse at all, but still alive. He was a young man, probably no older than Chet. At first she thought he was standing against the wall of one of the homes. Then she saw the metal spikes and the angry red wounds in his hands. He was not standing. He had been nailed there. "Get him down!" she cried, running forwards. She grasped the head of one of the spikes and pulled as hard as she could. It barely budged. Chet tugged the other spike, and it came out easily. The young man sagged, screaming as all his weight was put on the other hand. The spike ripped out before they could remove it, passing all the way through the flesh. Another scream tore the air. His eyes had been gouged out. The wounds were burned as though with a red-hot poker. Blood gushed from his hands, but there were no more cuts on his body, only deep burns and many, many bruises. He lay there whimpering like an animal, and Lauren nearly retched again as she saw both his legs were bent at odd angles. "No more," he said. "No more, I beg of you." "It is all right," said Lauren, though the words came from nowhere, and she knew them for a lie. "They have gone. We are here to help you." "Who are you?" He reached for her arm. "Who is that? Is that Dinah?" "No, Lauren struggled for the words. "I'm only a passerby. No one else is here. They are all gone." He broke into sobs at that, though no tears came from his ruined sockets. Lauren whipped off her cloak and rolled it up, gingerly lifting his head to place the cloak beneath it. The boy only kept weeping. "Lauren," said Chet gravely. She knew his mind without needing to hear the words. They had no healing for these wounds, nor would any healer in the 9 kingdoms. With a look to Chet to silence him, she gently put her hand over the boy's. His fingers tried to close over hers, but the pain of his mangled hand was too much, and he gave up. "Who did this?" she asked him, her voice soft and gentle. "Lauren," repeated Chet, this time in astonishment, but he fell silent as she gave him another hard look. "They were soldiers," said the boy. His voice gurgled a little in his throat. "I do not know. They had weapons and armor. Their captain was a beast." Lauren felt a chill of premonition creep over her. "What did he look like? Was he dark of skin?" "Yes, dark as the night," said the boy. "He called himself Rogan. He asked us for a girl in a black cloak, and something else." Lauren's throat had gone bone dry. She swiped the back of her sleeves across her eyes and went on in a shaking voice. "What then? How did the fight begin?" "There was no fighting," said the boy, his sobs deepening. "He gathered all of us together here. We told him we knew nothing of the girl, and he started killing us. We tried to run, but they chased us down. All but the children." She and Chet looked at each other. "What did he do with the children?" said Chet. "He took them," said the boy. "He said he was their father now. Then some tried to fight him, those whose children he tried to take, but he and his men killed them too. He killed them, and when I tried to help, they—" The boy bit his lip and sucked in his breath, but then he broke down and began to cry again. Lauren put her hand on his shoulder, one of the few places on his body the shades had not mangled, the only comfort she could think to give him. "I told him I did not know where she was, that none of us knew where she was," he said as he wept. "Finally he told me he believed me, but he did not stop. He never stopped." Eventually his cries subsided. Lauren leaned forwards, fearing he had died. But his lips moved again, barely able to whisper now. "Who are you?" Lauren could not answer past the tightness of her throat. "Are you the girl?" She would have given anything not to have to answer him, but she could not stop herself. "Yes." "The one he sought?" "Yes." "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." He turned his head away from her. A short while later, his chest shuddered in a breath, and then he lay still. Chet came to Lauren's side and put a hand on her shoulder. She threw it off and walked away. He let her go, slowly turning and going back to the others. Lauren walked out of the village on the west side, to the edge of the forest, shaking as silent tears ran down her face. In fury, she stared off between the trees. She wished they were there, Rogan and the Shades and all of them. Let them fight her here and now and be done with it. Who knew but that villages just like this one were being ransacked all throughout the forest? What death had she rained upon her homeland by her reckless flight into this wood? A small voice, a voice of reason that sounded very like Jordell, told her that she could not hold herself responsible for this, but the white-hot anger in her gut refused to listen. She stayed there, alone, until the tears passed and the sun had nearly set. Then she went back to the others, circling wide around the village, so she would not have to pass through the death and blood once more. They had retreated into the trees and were sitting silently in a circle. The children were staring at the ground while Chet watched nothing at all. Even Zane had a grim look, his mouth twisted with more than its usual bitterness. "We will rest here for the night," she said. "The Shades have come already. They will not be back, at least not for a time. We will ride on before first light." "Should we— I mean to say, the corpses," said Jem. "We cannot bury them all, not without spending many days here." "The Shades will have done this in other places," said Chet. "I imagine they will have. Can we not warn them? Or can we not at least give the Shades reason to pursue us, instead of killing innocents who have never even heard our names?" "How do you mean to stop them, Chet?" said Lauren, growing angry. "We could march into their midst and offer ourselves up for sacrifice. But as long as we are outside their grasp, they will hunt for us wherever they think we might be found." "So you mean to let them?" "We do not let them do anything," said Zane. "Did we invite them into the birchwood? Did we tell them where to find this village? Did we tell them to put these people to the sword?" Chet shook his head. "There must be something we can do." "There is not," said Lauren. "As is too often the case, we can only flee and survive, to someday deliver a greater stroke that might secure victory." Lauren thought of when she and Jordell had left the city of Wellmont under siege. Others had begged the mystic to stay, to aid in the defense of the city. He had refused, and when pressed, he had grown angry. At the time, Lauren had thought him somewhat heartless or ruthless. Now, at last, she understood. The wrath was a mask, a bandage meant to cover the gaping wound of his guilt. Doubtless Jordell would have fought upon the very walls of Wellmont and given his life in defense of the city without a second thought. But he had known, or suspected, that a greater battle lay just over the horizon, and so he needed Zane to survive. How long must he have traveled the 9 lands with that burden, letting ill deeds go unchecked in the service of stopping a far greater evil? Lauren looked at them all, at Chet and Zane and the children, their faces turned to her, angry and hurt and expectant. I will take the first watch. Rest, all of you. Even you, Zane. Tomorrow is another long ride to an uncertain end. Shadeborn, Chapter 16. The days afterwards passed like bitter months of winter, cold, reluctant, and lingering in the mind long after passing. No one spoke often, nor laughed, nor told any jokes, for the memories of the village in the forest plagued them. They slept only a few hours at a time, when neither the sun nor the moons were there to guide their way. Often as they pressed on, their heads would sag against their chests for a moment, only to snap upward at a jostle in the road. Zane's condition was growing slowly worse, and though Lauren tried not to pay it too much mind, she could not ignore it entirely. Fortunately, it was not as bad as it had been in the Great Rocks. Then he had been driven to madness, half the time forgetting who and where he was, and the other half filled with a murderous rage that he sought to unleash upon Lauren and the others. This was more of a quiet wasting away, a slow breaking down of his body. Lauren often saw him wincing as he dismounted, and his skin had begun to bruise easily at even a light touch. But he spoke no word of complaint, and always matched the pace Lauren set, and so she kept her thoughts on the road ahead. 5 days after they found the village slaughtered in the birchwood, they came at last out the northern side of the forest and down into the kingdom of Dorsey. Early on that day, Lauren noticed that the trees were sparser and shorter, and seemed less hardy than those in the south. The ground turned from soft loam and grass to a brown and brittle dirt, which kicked up much dust that took long to settle. Dorsey itself, when they reached it, was much the same. The land was not quite mountainous, but rolling and hilly as far as the eye could see, browner than it was green. What vegetation there was came in small, scrubby bushes and spindly trees that sucked what water they could from the earth. To the west and to the south, Dorsey is much like Selvin, said Zane, but here it is half a desert. The land may be tilled, but not easily, and so the people are as hard and stubborn as the land upon which they feed themselves. Still, adversity has made them somewhat kinder than their western and southern brethren, who, like many fat and happy people, begin to turn their eyes outward to what more they can claim for their own. I know much of Dortian greed, said Lauren. It is what brings them to war with Selvin over and over again. Chet nodded firmly. You speak with many dramatics and little truth, said Annis, rolling her eyes. Why, I have met many merchants from Dorsey, and members of the Dortian royal family, and they were no more or less crafty than any other inhabitants of the High King's seat, those from Selvin included. You are a gem among women, Lauren, and you seem a decent enough fellow, Chet, but you must know that not all people of your kingdom are so good and kind-hearted as you. It is no less foolish to claim great knowledge of all people when you have spent all your life upon the seat, said Zane. It could be said, rather, that the wealthy and the powerful are much the same from one kingdom to the next, though the people they rule may vary wildly. But this is idle philosophy, and we have little time for it. Let us press on. Now they were in open territory, and a land about which Lauren knew little. Zane took to guiding them, for as he told them, he had traveled Dorsey well as a young man. Do not tell me you hail from this kingdom, said Annis in surprise. It is hard to say where I hail from, said Zane, especially since my first answer would have been the seat until recently, and they will no longer claim me as their own. But as for where I was born, that is Wadeland to the east, though I left it as a young boy when my parents found I had the gift of elementalism." "And how did they find that out?" said Jem, leaning forwards with interest. "Were you bandying about the horses one day when you accidentally set the stable boy on fire?" Zane chuckled. An odd sound from him these days, and one Lauren welcomed. "Nothing so crude as that. Though I can hardly blame you for thinking so, since you are a commoner and know little of the practices of the wealthy. When a child of royalty nears his 6th year, he is required by law to see a representative of the Academy. Wealthy families, even those who are not royalty, such as my parents, pay in coin for such a representative to visit them. These men know how to test for the gift, and they put the child through a series of trials, meant to discover if any of the 4 branches have presented themselves in any strength." "I took the trials," said Annis, sounding as if she were trying very hard not to boast. "They found nothing. What do they do, I wonder, if a child shows the gift of more than one type of magic?" "That is impossible," said Zane. "Wizards are gifted with only one, even the most powerful among us." With those words, he fixed Lauren with a look. She thought, as he must be thinking, of the Life Mage and the Necromancer, and the 2 branches of magic that had lay hidden for centuries. How did the wizards of the Academy detect them, if they even could? She doubted if they would ever know. This has been a production of Legacy Books, written and narrated by Garrett Robinson. The music in this podcast was created by Will Musser. Check out his incredible work at willmusser.com. That's WILLMUSSER.com. Today's letter is E. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.